Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Welcome to the podcast once again, Dan Fletcher, and we had such a good discussion before we decided to make a part 2 for this podcast, and maybe we could get into some more technical details and talk a little bit more about some of the really neat things that DCBEL is doing. So once again, Dan Fletcher is the founder and head of ecosystems at DCBEL. Welcome back, Dan.
Hey, thanks, Sean. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you too. And I really liked our discussion, and I'm really interested in what you're doing, especially the bidirectional EV charging, and maybe just as a refresher too, because not everybody listens to every podcast, or people are busy and people can't remember everything that they listen to. So maybe just kind of give us an overview of what DCBEL does.
Yeah, sure thing. It is quite different. You know, we think of it as a home energy station. And so really a single device that brings together a lot of the power activity that happens at a house. It's only a residential product. And it really performs the power conversion functions for solar, for storage if the house wants to have backup power, partly from stationary batteries. And then, as you say, it also has a bidirectional EV capability, and in fact can be a dual charger too. You can charge 2 cars with the DCBEL.
Oh, wow. So 2 cars at once.
2 cars at once, and also you can boost charge a car at 16 kilowatts at home.
Wow. Okay.
And that's DC, right? So that's equivalent of much higher in AC because you have to factor in the losses you would have in conversion.
Yeah, so I know my car, it's an old EV. It's actually 11 years old, but it's still, the battery seems as good as new to me. It's got 85 kilowatt hours in it. And when I charge it at home, the fastest I can charge it is with AC because it's the onboard charger. And so what's typically most people have these days is a charger that's AC. But I know that sometimes when people have bidirectional chargers, or at least that technology, then they're connecting to the DC part of the battery, typically doing that. And when I do take my car to the fast charger, it's a DC thing. Is that why you can charge it a lot faster, because you're connecting right to the battery more like DC?
Yeah, there's a couple of important points there. And it is true that things will vary from car to car, model to model. And it is also true, as you say, that quite often there's a maximum charge rate that an AC charger will be able to provide. And that's based on the rating of the power conversion technology inside the car. Whereas, as you say, if you have DC, then the DC port connects more directly to the battery and doesn't have any power conversion that needs to be done on the vehicle. So it usually is not as a constraint on your ability to charge at a faster rate. In fact, usually with DC, you can do so. Now, for the first time, you can have a DC charger at home. And that's sort of something that is quite different than what we've lived through. But it's something actually that has a lot of traction internationally. And many markets are moving to DC at home for some of these reasons.
I wonder, is it like, do all electric vehicles have the ability to AC charge? Or do you think like maybe in Europe or something like that, there's cars that don't even do AC charging?
It's a good question. I mean, at the present time, almost every EV make and model comes with 2 ways to charge, a DC charger and the AC. But there are different activities happening out there to phase out AC. And also, you know, if you're buying the car or if you're selling the car, if you can not include that 50 pounds of gear that's liquid cooled, that's sort of sensitive power equipment that you carry on the car just to be able to charge an AC, you don't need that. Then the car can be much less costly and probably better mean time between failure. So that's a tricky piece to build.
Okay, yeah. Just of interest is my car, it's a Tesla 2015, and it was in an accident. I was teaching somebody how to drive, and Tesla turned off my ability to DC charge. Like, I don't think they should have the right to do that, you know, but But I thought that was kind of,
And was that related to the accident in some way, or?
yeah, they said because it was, maybe they're worried that it's dangerous or something. Like I have to pay them to take apart the car to inspect it to make sure that it's not dangerous. It seems kind of like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Safety first,
but it's my property. Like,
Maybe you shouldn't
yeah,
be teaching people in your car. Just kidding.
yeah,
Be careful who you teach.
I know, looking back on it.
Yeah, that's a specific case,
Uh-huh.
but in general, I've never heard of that actually.
Yeah.
Something disabled remotely like that.
Yeah. And like I have free supercharging for life. They turned that off. Maybe that's the real reason. And maybe Elon heard that I said something bad about him, maybe something like that. I don't know.
Everyone has observations and he can take it, I'm sure.
Uh-huh. I know he loves to yell at people. So, yeah. So instead of digressing, maybe we could move forward. So we were talking about like how you can do DC charging. Does it also do AC charging or is it only DC charging?
Yeah, it does, in fact.
Mhm.
If you need to charge an AC, the Decibel has an AC gun.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe like you said, we could go just a little tiny bit more technical. And a lot of people like to understand how come we can do this stuff now when it hasn't been done before.
Mm-hmm.
And, that happens in technology not that often, but thank goodness it does happen. And, we had a moment many years ago now in a lab where we designed a kind of power board that was one of the very early generations of these digital multi-level inverters.
Mm-hmm.
And so we basically are able to compose and decompose the AC waveform. That's really what you're doing. The power conversion, the DC is a flat signal, the AC is a waveform. And so you got to make it flat or make it wavy when you do that conversion. And so we were trying to do that with robust, inexpensive, available micro components. And that was kind of already a big, ambitious target. But at one point in those early days, we realized that by changing the digital signaling that you could send to the power board, you could just tell it to go the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a crazy moment where people, is that true? Can that really be true? And that resulted in a whole bunch of patents and some patent disputes. And it resulted in, this very compact, very versatile power conversion system. So you can do AC to DC, DC to AC, and DC to DC. And something that's very different about the Decibel is that it will look at a problem and say, okay, I've got solar generation. What should I do with it? And this is under the hood.
Mm-hmm.
This is solver engine that's working with machine learning all the time on behalf of the household. If it works out, the best thing to do is charge a battery, charge the car, or the best thing to do is to convert that energy to AC to use in the load or to send to the grid. All of these outcomes are available and part of the calculation. It literally does 250,000 calculations per day on a typical house. If it has solar storage, 2 cars, a load, the utility invoice, maybe some variable pricing, dynamic rates, or all those things can be constantly re-examined as to what should I do next. So the cool thing is if you're generating DC and you need DC, then it doesn't convert it. It just conditions the DC signal. And that represents a big breakthrough in terms of reducing losses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always wondered that if in the future there'll be different types of software that will look at all kinds of things to figure out how to do energy management. So like you were saying, weather and things like that, but human behavior. If your phone's in your pocket and you're walking home and you might go take off in your car because you did it last Thursday, or what's the percentage chance of that happening? Or if you're driving home, they tell what your car's doing. If there's a microphone in your house and they heard somebody yelling and like, oh, that means he's going to the bar. That's what happens when they start yelling, or and if the car should charge for how long. I mean, just like you said, 250,000 calculations. I wonder how much of that will be actually happening in the future. And I'm kind of joking about some of these things, obviously.
Well, a lot of those items, that future is already here with the Decibel, because it does have its own operating system. And one thing I'll emphasize is that with all those calculations, almost all of them are done on the local processor.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not using cloud computation. And that could be very costly if you do in the cloud. So Decibel is as much a computer as anything else. And so it's able to crunch this information. But I mean, it sounds like a ridiculous number. It's really invisible to everyone. We basically recreated a lot of what the grid does.
Mm-hmm.
So we use a 5-minute timestamp, mark to market, clock to market. And then, as you say, we're able to we do send very localized weather. The weather is localized to a square,
Mm-hmm.
many, many squares all around the world. Which square are you in? Because when it comes to your generation and it comes to your load, you can really learn a lot about what's going to happen from the weather. And then as the weather forecast changes, then that will be fed to the system and then it can reorganize itself. So if you think you're going to have a very significant solar production day, then you can afford to go more aggressively in draining your batteries or your car,
Mm-hmm.
as one example. And it can also be indirect to things that are derived that if it's going to be very cold, then you're going to have a high heating load. And then you also know what happened yesterday, what happened last week, eventually what happened last year on this day, because there's sort of
Mm-hmm.
a reservoir of data that's kept that helps with the machine learning.
Like weekends and holidays and changing schedule that way too. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And, the guiding principle that we have always is this is someone's house and this is their car, that's their transport. So those things are the primary function. But if the car is there and the load is to be managed, or at least the way that energy is served to the home can be managed, the outcome is you don't really notice it as a customer, but you do notice it on what it costs you.
And perhaps another thing too is maybe there would be a setting, or even it could look at your calendar going like, oh, they're going to go on vacation for a week. Let's, make this car battery make us some money and support the grid with that car battery.
That's right. Well, with the Decibel right away, you do have a screen on the device and it gives a lot of information and some inputs that you can make, like you can boost charge your car, for example. But then you do also have an app on your smartphone or your tablet or whatever that household uses to run their apps. And there we have many features. And some of those features you're talking about are being built by our team and being pushed out on new firmware releases. And so that's one thing that we've learned from Apple and Tesla and others. The piece of technology that has a processor in the customer's hands, that you can update the firmware and you can add, the sky's the limit on what you can add in terms of functionality and features. So that one is a great one, saying I'm going to be away, my car's sitting there. And increasingly the data is that it's not good to leave a car fully charged.
Mm-hmm.
The dwell on the battery is super important.
Mm-hmm.
And actually cycling the battery sometimes can be better than just leaving it charged for degradation. And so, those things are a little bit counterintuitive. We tend to think of it as the more you use something, the faster it wears out. But the data doesn't show that for these batteries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, the human body has sodium, potassium pumps, and it's sort of like a battery, like you send something into and out of a cell, and exercise is good for you.
That's right. Yeah, we are electric beings for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we control our bodies is electric.
Mm-hmm. They say use it or lose it.
Yeah, I don't believe those posts that you see where it says you have a finite number of heartbeats and that's not going to change. The heart is a muscle and you keep it strong. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, that's why I just changed my mind and I'm going to be a couch potato for the rest of my life so I can live longer. Yeah, it's even the people with hip replacements that led active lives. I think they probably live longer than the people that sitting on their couches the whole time.
Yeah, we're made to be outside, that's for sure.
Yeah, so this sounds like a really neat thing, and especially I'm really excited. We call it bidirectional charging. However, it's charging and discharging. And I kind of thought that it was going to happen sooner. And it's always been kind of interesting to me how the utilities and the EV companies haven't been pushing harder for it. Perhaps you're going to make that happen. And do you have any idea why the utilities and the EV companies haven't been pushing harder for it? Maybe the EV companies maybe could sell you a home battery too, or something like that. It's like Tesla can sell you a car and a Powerwall. So that would be a reason not to have bidirectional charging. Or the utility, of course, they have this old way of doing things and they're making a lot of money. And why should they change it? Maybe that's a reason why they're not pushing harder for it too, because being able to do this would help the grid. Virtual power plants help the grid. It just seems like it would be a benefit for everyone.
Yeah, and you've touched on an awful lot there, and I do have a lot to say about that. One thing to start with, I would say, is that Decibel, we're an active member of the VGIC, the Vehicle Grid Integration Council, and they are an association devoted really to the subjects that you're talking about there, that we have this unprecedented encounter between power providers and car vendors. And that didn't used to really happen. And obviously there was an equivalent with oil and gas companies and car vendors, and they have a lot of complexity to the way that they do things and budget things in the ICE world. I think in the first instance, hesitancy on the EV OEM side about bidirectional use of the vehicles was about wondering about battery life and battery impact. But there is also kind of a vicious chicken and egg to this thing, that do you want to invest to make your car bidirectional and support that service under warranty out in the real world? And the answer has to be, well, is there a way for somebody to monetize that activity that makes it worth doing and kind of provides an economic engine for the activity? And then on top of that, you have a bunch of grid code. And luckily, for the residential segment, unluckily and luckily, America has one of the toughest certification programs for electrical appliances in the world, where you have national labs that drop these things and drop things on them and light them on fire and all kinds of water. And it is pretty astounding when you go deeply into a UL certification, what all has to happen.
It's kind of ironic. Like, how do you save the planet? Well, I'm going to get a job destroying batteries to save the planet.
Yeah, that's right. So the thing is, once you get through that certification, the good news is that, a piece of equipment now can be trusted to do the things that it's purported to do. And so with the bidirectional certification of UL 1741 SB, there is a secure pathway to do bidirectional DC discharge, charge and discharge, that's on the books and that's available. It is a very difficult standard to meet, and there are almost no products that meet that today. We do have that certification at Decibel, and so that helps some of the utilities to get over the hump. If I want a program for this, or if I want to create a pathway for this, there has to be a certified and on the books way to do it. But then you have a lot of other actors in the provision of energy in the residential world, and who, we call them, let's say, commercial aggregators. And a lot of utilities will rely on these third parties to stand up an energy program so that it'll be easy for people to enroll. They can do it through an app. They can have this sort of same customer kind of journey as they would with other types of programs that they sign on to through an app. And so some utilities are doing that part of it themselves, but very few. They might do it in a vertical where they contract for it, or they white label something that's kind of a package. But there is that piece of, how do you deliver the possibility of this kind of program to the end user? And so our philosophy there is, there are 3,300 or so different utility jurisdictions in America, and they each will do different things. They may have different rules. They may have different contenders that are standing up those programs. They may support VPPs. They may have a totally flat pricing system where it doesn't really make sense to do anything like this. And we feel that it's up to the household to decide what makes sense for them, and then for us to enable their enrollment in that program. Mm-hmm. And so if you think of it this way, the Decibel can host a third-party energies program on the Decibel. And if the customer wants that, they assign the levers of those controls to that third party. And this is all done in the back end through APIs. And then, the device can be administered that way. Then if they decide to change providers or something, that's available too. You can switch.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSEAN, that's Solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. Yeah, before we've done some calculations and we looked at the price of putting an energy storage system in your home, on your wall, on the garage floor, wherever you're going to put it, and then the price of buying an electric vehicle. And it was surprisingly very close. Like if there's enough rebates, the car was even cheaper per kilowatt hour. Plus you get wheels and upholstery and all that kind of stuff. So it seems just like really neat to be able to have your car be your battery. Another thing too is there's the code. So you're specializing in residential. That would be the IRC, the International Residential Code. And there's a lot of limits to how much energy storage you can put in your garage. In fact, it's almost against code to put it in the garage because we need special kind of heat detectors, because the garage can get really hot, and for fire safety and all this kind of stuff. Well, cars, you put the car in the garage, the electric vehicle in the garage, then if you could plug it in to be a bidirectional electric vehicle, you don't have to do the same International Residential Code stuff. So it's like you could put a whole lot more energy storage in your house. And cars go through a lot of safety testing and things like you were saying. So it's not that I don't think it's dangerous or anything like that, especially as time goes on and we figure these things out. So it just seems very forward thinking to be able to use your car battery. And it seems almost unfair that you can't use your car battery up until this point.
Yeah, well, you can now. And it is true that when you do it, it seems like the most natural thing. And it's incredibly satisfying too. If there's a power outage and then your house switches to being operating on the car and or the ESS plus solar if you have it, and you can go it alone for days, with that kind of a configuration, depending on the state of charge and how that was managed. And it feels completely normal that you should be able to do that. But that's very new. And we're impressed by the uptake of the proposition from the EV vendor community, where the EV OEMs, I think, really recognize that this is a trick that their EVs can do that other cars can't do, and that it's valuable for people. And actually, as you say, it's valuable for the grid too. We build the grid for peak and demand, but the actual rate of usage is very much lower, less than half of the capacity usually. And so if you can marshal storage within the distribution part of the grid to reduce your need to invest so heavily in upgrading it, especially with so much growth and demand, it makes these kind of energy routines all that more attractive. And people need to be compensated accordingly for that. There's a value and you can calculate what it is. And if it's priced well, I think a lot of people will enroll.
Yeah, and I just thought of a good application too. So you have a home battery, you have a bidirectional electric vehicle, you have a solar system on your roof, and you're going to go to work in the morning, and you top off your battery with all of the energy from that battery that's on your wall right before you go to work. And then that battery on your wall is empty and the sun comes up and you fill up that battery on the wall. And that way you're not exporting electricity to the grid in a place where they don't give you much credit for exporting to the grid, like they get rid of net metering, like in California, something like that. And so that would be like a pretty good thing to be able to do. And then maybe if it wasn't such a sunny day, like on the weather forecast, then maybe you wouldn't dump out that battery as much, and you still can get to work with your electric vehicle battery. Say it would just be the difference between 60 and 80% charged or something like that, which gets you by on most days, usually for most people with your average commute. So it just seems like there's a lot of neat things.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you just hit on a couple of the 250,000 calculations, and that's exactly one of the things that's happening under the hood is those calculations.
Mm-hmm.
Should I fill this with that? Where should I send? And so it really is part of the way the system works. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty neat. And I'm sure there's just so many variables. And so now we only have 249,999 calculations to go. We can cover it all in this podcast.
Well, a couple of, energy dorks like us, we could probably improve many of them. But, in terms of this technology is conceived for the normal consumer, not the energy dork. And so you end up with our guiding principle anyways, for most things to run in the background automatically. And then through the app for the user to be able to fine tune their preferences. And then if you have a Sean White type of user, then, there could be drop down menus where you can go into the weeds. And some people love that. I'm one of them too, I have to admit.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. Yeah. And another thing that I've always wondered too is about the future. I'm always trying to think of like what's the next thing in the future? And we were talking about like distributed energy resources and things like that. So we've got like batteries in different places, making virtual power plants, your car connecting to the grid at home and at work. And you could decide if you want to shuttle home energy to work or work energy to home, and that could all be coordinated. But another resource, especially in like cars that can drive themselves, which is the future and somewhat present, is that we need to have these large processors, computer chips in the cars. And it seems that the decibel is pretty smart. So I'm sure you're putting things in there. And I am sure that probably 10 years from now, there's going to be a lot more processing power in homes, and especially in cars too, which are part of homes part of the time. So that processing power, just like the batteries in an electric vehicle, there's a lot of times that it would be turned off, not being used. So if it's not being used, would there be a way to use it for some sort of distributed data center? Just like we have a virtual power plant, can we have a virtual data center? And I've never heard of anybody talking about that, but to me, it just seems like it's probably going to happen, especially with these self-driving cars requiring lots of data processing.
Yeah, it's a very hot topic, the data center, and where the crunching happens isn't that important, providing you have the proper routing and cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
With the decibel, California is ahead of most places on having standards, and part of that is because in this field anyways, they've been ahead on solar and storage deployment than many places. So we have in California this CSIP technical aggregator certification that is for a DER to essentially have, an encrypted tunnel from the house to the cloud so that you can connect up with the DERMS, but then so you can also take receipt of some of the kind of signaling that you need to under Rule 21 in California, and their equivalents in other places. But I use California because it's sort of, I guess, the most evolved that way. That would be an important part of it, is the cybersecurity part. I think that our buddies at SPAN have been making some white paper type of approaches to this idea of a distributed data center. It isn't something that is on the roadmap, I would say, for decibel at the present time. But I would say that there is, as you say, a lot of processing power available there. And our guiding principle is it's up to the household what they do. If someone presented an offer to our customers where they were able to make use of excess capacity they had, and that could be done in enrollment that was pretty straightforward, and that the compensation was aligned with make it worth doing, technically it is something that could happen.
This podcast is brought to you by Sunlight. Sunlight makes you shine. Yeah, and I just thought of something that probably might just be more of a novelty, but it would also get attention: Bitcoin mining. So you've got, like, let's say the solar system's going, nobody's home, it's a nice sunny day, you have all this extra energy, you're in some place where you're not allowed to export, and you have some processing power because you said it can do 250,000 calculations, and those calculations probably aren't all done at once. So there's probably a lot of time where that chip in there isn't doing anything, And so with Bitcoin mining, there's some people out there that have this little thing, they call it lottery mining or something like that. They have this little, it's just kind of a novelty. It's not cost effective for the electricity, but we have extra electricity that we can't export in this case. And we have extra processing power. So if you took that extra electricity, that extra processing power, and you turn it up to 50% or whatever, you didn't want to override your chip or anything. It's not that important, but it would be kind of a novelty to be able to, like, if you're lucky, one of the lucky customers, and somebody will be like, I think they call it hitting a block or something, like whatever it is, and then all of a sudden they made $100,000, and maybe out of 1 million people, maybe one of them every month makes $100,000. That would be kind of cool. And it's just sitting there doing nothing anyway.
It's not in our sweet spot today, but it's funny you mentioned it because two of the folks that started the Bitcoin Embassy way back when used to do some contract work for us in our lab. And we hired them, and they're very good at many things. Now I think they live on some private island. I mean, the way Bitcoin has gone and how many they've had, you know. But in general, I think, you know, Bitcoin uses a fierce amount of power. I suspect that there'll be much cleverer ways to manage digital currency that is not so energy hungry. You know, there's so many things happening that use power that are wasteful. You know, you think about all the people with all their photos that never get pruned and deleted, and they're all sitting on servers somewhere that are taking energy, and that just grows and grows and grows. And so that if we're smart, we're going to devise a system that prices in economy of energy. And we were able to participate that in a remote way where we can bring the house, the DER and its assets into the market. And then if the market is right, where it makes sense for the household to do it, then those things can be part of the solution.
Well, maybe those guys that were working with you that are now retired on a private island because Bitcoin price went up, maybe they're bored. Maybe they would, you know, help you out.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look Shaq and Dom up. I mean, we'll see what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just like you have all this extra energy. A lot of solar systems can't export to the grid. A lot of people aren't home all the time. And so there's extra energy that you just curtail, you turn off. And there's extra computing power that you just turn off, or it's only working at 10%. And it would just be kind of at least a neat novelty to be able to do that. People could opt in or out of, and who knows, maybe they'll make 100 grand, you know, just being lucky.
You know, these ideas that you're spitting off, I think you'll probably have a lot more once you have a decibel to play with in your hands.
Oh, let's do it. Yeah. How do I get one?
You just go on to decibel.energy. You live in California,
Yeah.
You may qualify for the Redwoods program,
Okay.
which can give up to full payment of the hardware with some conditions that you have to opt into dynamic pricing. And there are other conditions about DAC communities and so on to give more equal access and financial support. But yeah, the Redwoods program is live now. Maybe you could be one of the houses in the first cohort.
Okay, we're going to do that. And so the editors listening to this podcast, make sure that we sign up for this Redwood program, because actually I'm making a solar training center right now in the Redwoods. I'm looking at redwood trees. I'm matching stucco colors to redwood, and I definitely need a decibel system. And I need to have some bidirectional charging capabilities, and I need it now. So
Okay, well, yeah, you're lucky to be near those beautiful trees. This one is an acronym. It's REDWDS. So that sounds like Redwoods, but that's how you would find it.
okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Dan Fletcher. And Dan is the founder and head of ecosystems at Decibel, and that's spelled DCBEL. And let's see, is there any other things that you wanted to cover right now?
I guess, you know, one final thought maybe for you is that there be calls to action for when people would consider having a decibel. If they're concerned about blackouts, then that would be one. If they get an EV and they don't have a charger at home and they think, well, maybe I can move straight to this technology that allows me to discharge my car potentially and be future-proof for other cars that could do that. Or if you're getting solar at your home, the decibel is the solar inverter. You don't need any other solar inverter. And so, you know, those are kind of the ways that people can find an on-ramp to the decibel. Once you do one of them, you can unlock the others mainly through software.
Yeah, Dan, I really feel sorry for these people that have inverters that don't do bidirectional EV charging. It's very sad.
Well, technology favors the new entrant, and hopefully those folks have had some good solar performance. Some of them have been through the net metering where they, paid it off in 5 or 6 years. Now you got to be a bit smarter with how you use your solar. Use it to charge your car or to charge a battery that gets discharged into a good market, then that's another way to speed up the value of your solar compared to just blindly pushing it out to the grid.
Great. Okay. Do you have any recommendations for EVs that people should buy that work with bidirectional charging with a decibel?
There are a lot of great EVs out there, and we're in discussions with many of their makers, but I can say that cars that support the bidirectional use in market today in the US, you have Volvo, Polestar, you have Nissan. Those would be 3 that I know they work. We have them out in the field. We've had them in our labs. It's amazing how much energy is available from one of these over 100 kilowatt hour batteries. Other EV OEMs are moving quickly to support bidirectionality. And there's some noise out there. There's some use of the present tense when it maybe ought to not really be used when it comes to AC V2G, for example, that's still not really on the books and there isn't a pathway to do it. So, people need to read the fine print.
Yeah. AC vehicle to grid sounds kind of difficult because you would be able to perhaps go to somebody else's house and start backfeeding their grid, and they don't have the wiring in their house to be able to handle it.
Yeah, that's a use case that could be an issue. And that's one, going back to your earlier question about utilities, one of their concerns about an EV is a large amount of energy that can show up anywhere. They're used to interconnected things to be fixed and not moving. So it's going to take a little adjusting there.
Yeah, to bring your inverter to your friend's house, right? Okay, great. Well, thanks so much, Dan Fletcher, founder and head of ecosystems at DCBEL.
Thank you, Sean.
All right. If you ever want to do it again, just sign yourself up and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Look forward to hearing it.